Welcome again to our data help session. Today we were going to talk about some opportunities for enhancing data discoverability and reproducibility, particularly through linking data sets, samples, and code with publications, which I hope is something all of you are thinking about a little bit, and we'll talk about how to actually do that in the various systems that we've been talking about. So Kirsten, go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, we want to promote the use of the FAIR principles. We're using repositories that promote these principles, and hopefully this is nothing new to any of you. You've all heard of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And you probably have even seen this slide from me before. And I want to just remind you all the extent to which data are FAIR affects their value and extent of reuse. Because obviously if people can't find your data, they're never going to reuse it. If it's not accessible, they're never going to reuse it. And so those are pretty big things that we want to promote here.
Sorry.
No problem. And so one important way to enhance the findability and reusability of the products that your team is producing is to make sure that they are linked together. So here we're talking about publications linked to data and vice versa. The physical samples and sample metadata linked to results and publications. And there's a couple of other ways that we'll talk about linking things together. And of course, we want to promote people who find your data being able to see that there are publications that use that data and then linking off to those publications. And then if people find your publications, we want them to be able to go to the references section, click on the links in the references section, and go to the repository where your data are actually located. So this becomes a very nice linked way for people to traverse back and forth between the publications that maybe some people are focused on and the data that other people may be focused on. And of course, the same for samples, right? So we have the ability now to create metadata for physical samples, and we have the ability to link those samples to publications and linking publications to samples and all of that kind of good stuff. Okay, next slide, Kirsten. All right, I should have written, this is an early version of a slide, I should have written the HydroShare and EarthChem and Zenodo capabilities here, because I think everything that is true here of HydroShare is also true of those other two. Yeah,
so this is an older version. Oh, wait.
No, we didn't modify this one, sorry. So everywhere it says HydroShare here, think HydroShare, EarthChem, and Zenodo. Everything in HydroShare has a citation on the landing page. I think that's also true of EarthChem, right, Kirsten?
Yep.
And it's also true of everything in Zenodo. If you put something in Zenodo, it's going to have a citation. When people are writing journal papers, they should use those citations in the references section of the paper, and then they should cite them in the text of the paper in the same way you would cite a journal article or anything else that you're putting in the references section of the paper. In HydroShare, and I think also in EarthChem, we have the concept of related resources. So that means in a HydroShare resource, you can say there's this paper that used the data, or there's a thesis that used the data, or a dissertation, or whatever it happens to be. So related papers, theses, dissertations that use the data, you can add those as related resources. And then you can also share code in HydroShare, and I'll give you an example of this a little bit later on, where if you have a paper where you've used a particular data set and a set of code, you can choose to share those together in a resource, and you can do it as a Jupyter notebook in a way that that code can actually be executed. So next slide, Kirsten.
Yeah, just to add here, the way EarthChem does it slightly different with code. We ask people to put the code in GitHub and then link to that.
Okay, great.
Oops.
Nope, that's good. We're good. There's a little bit of animation here. So this is what that looks like in a HydroShare resource. So at the bottom of the landing page, there's that how to cite section, and the actual citation is there. You can copy the citation and paste it into your document. And the same is true of EarthChem. Permanently published resources have a digital object identifier, but until they're formally and permanently published, those DOIs are not active. In HydroShare, public resources have a persistent URL, and that URL will always work regardless of whether you've formally published something in HydroShare or not. Okay. HydroShare and EarthChem resources can cite other resources on the web, which might include a journal paper. So Kirsten, if you'd click once in a HydroShare resource or in an EarthChem resource or in a Zenodo resource, you can have these related resources. So in this particular example, go back one. These relationships say that the content of that resource serve as the data for the paper and the thesis of Bryce's. And then if you click on those links, so click twice, Kirsten. There we go. There's Bryce's paper. And then if you click one more time, there's the resources in HydroShare that Bryce's paper actually used, and he's included in the references section of his paper. So really similar, you would do this similarly in HydroShare, EarthChem, or Zenodo. You've got your data in a repository, the data has a citation, you are citing it in the references section of your paper, and then in the text of the paper, you would refer to the data using Mihaljevic and Horsborough 2017b, or Mihaljevic and Horsborough 2017a, however you put that in the references section of your paper. All right, one more, Kirsten. Okay, this is your slide, Kirsten, so go ahead and take the next couple.
Just, I mean, you had said that, you know, there are guidelines and, you know, this data citation. I just added this to show there are resources actually also out on the web that explain these citation protocols. And many of the earth science journals follow these guidelines. Unfortunately, some still don't, and in some cases you can even run into problems that the editor comes back and says, well, you need to take these data citations out of your reference list. Unfortunately, there are some. Please point them to these guidelines and insist that that's the right way to do it. I think that was, yeah, this is another resource for those who might need to cite dynamic data, meaning any, you know, time series data that keep changing, that keep being added onto. I don't know if HydroShare actually aligns with these guidelines.
Interesting that you ask. I've never actually seen these guidelines, so we should take a look at these. Thanks Thanks for linking that.
Okay, but I keep going now, right?
Keep going. Yep. Okay, so I've got a couple of examples here. Yeah, you can just click on them, and it should open a browser.
It should. Which
may show up on another of your screens if you've got multiple screens.
Yes, it does. Oh, darn. And now, how do I, now I need to, that was not so good. Especially because I can't get to the other screen. That's the problem. You know, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and actually
let me try sharing, Kirsten, because I've got this first one open in my browser window. Okay, probably you'll be able to see my browser. Okay. All right, can you see my browser?
Yeah, no, that's
perfect. Okay, so this is a resource that one of my students put together. He's got his title, his abstract, his keywords, all that kind of stuff. He's got his data organized the way he wants to. And then just like in the slide that you saw down here in related resources, here's the journal paper that he wrote based on these data. So if I click on that link in HydroShare, it's going to take me off to his paper in the journal. And then here's his thesis. So if I want to see Bryce's thesis that also used the data, there's a link to his thesis. In HydroShare, this resource has a digital object identifier, so it's got a DOI, it's formally published. Once you formally publish something in HydroShare, you can't change the title, you can't change the authors, and you can't change the content files, but you can go back and edit this resource. Let's say Bryce published another paper, or somebody else published a paper that used this resource. You could go back into edit mode and you could add a related resource here for that particular paper. All right, Kirsten, I think that probably for those first two HydroShare examples, that's probably good. So maybe we can, if I go back into presentation mode, you're probably not going to be able to, did it go black again?
Yep.
Huh, that's really weird.
Same way, yeah, there is something funny going on because I also can't get to my browser.
Well, let me, instead of showing the slide, let me just show you the example because I can do this in my browser window. Okay, so this particular example is, the slide is, what if I want to share a reproducible analysis? What if I want to share data and code together in HydroShare? What if I want to link to a computational environment that doesn't actually require people to install, Python or R or whatever? In this particular resource in HydroShare, this is related to the webinar that Tony Castronova did several weeks ago. I've got a CSV data file, and then I've got a Jupyter notebook. And if I go up here to the top of my resource and say, open with Quasi Jupyter Hub, it's going to take a second. So I have to agree to the Jupyter notebook or Quasi's Jupyter Hub terms of use. And then I have to authorize. And then I know that this is Python code, but there's also an R environment here. And there's a couple of other Python environments that are set up for particular people doing particular things. But this is a Python Jupyter notebook. When I click start, it spins up a whole Linux server for me in Quasi's Jupyter Hub environment. This is happening in the Google Cloud. And then it actually copies all of the data files from my HydroShare resource over to that computational environment. And it takes a couple seconds to set it up. But after a few seconds here, it should pop up a Jupyter environment, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And over here, I see my data file, and there's my Jupyter notebook. And if I double click on that, I'm now in a computational environment with the data file that was in HydroShare, the Jupyter notebook that was in HydroShare, and I can start running the elements in this notebook one by one. And they take a second to run. And I get down here and it actually generates a plot. So maybe this is figure 5 in my paper, and I want people to be able to, oh crud, I'm seeing all the notes in the chat. You can't see my screen.
Yeah. Oh, and I thought I was going crazy.
I'm really sorry, everybody. Let's try this again. Am I sharing now?
Yep.
Okay. So you didn't see any of that. Imagine you saw this amazing demo where I went through the steps in my Jupyter notebook like this, and I hit play and I go through the code steps and things are running and they're doing all sorts of wonderful things. And I get down here to this code and it generates a plot that is maybe like figure 5 in my paper, right? So in this environment, there's my data file, there's my Jupyter notebook, and those match what I have in my HydroShare resource over here. So here's the data file, here's the Jupyter notebook. And the way I got over to that Jupyter environment was clicking open with, and then clicking on Quasi Jupyter Hub. All right, so sorry about that, everybody. Is there anything else that you missed that you want me to show again? Okay, Perfect. Let me show you just a couple more things then. In HydroShare, there's a couple of other ways that you can link things together. So there is such a thing as versioning in HydroShare. So if I copy this URL and I go back to my browser here, and this is just a random example that I found last night when I was putting these slides together. So this is a resource that somebody's created. It's got some teaching materials, and you'll notice here at the top, an older version of this resource exists. So if you click on that link, it traverses you back in time to the older version. And when you get to the older version, it says a newer version of this exists. So that traverses you forward in time. So that's an example of versioning. You can have related resources in HydroShare that link to, of course, journal articles, theses, dissertations, as we just said, but you can also include other data sets. So here's a resource that says, okay, down here in related resource, the content of this resource references, and this is a different HydroShare resource. Oh no, that link is broken. I'm gonna have to tell Camilo about that. I didn't actually click on the link yesterday, but. Okay, so those related resources can be papers, theses, reports, dissertations, other data sets and other repositories. There is such a thing as a collection resource in HydroShare. So if you have a bunch of resources that you want to link together, but you want to be able to cite them separately, here's an example where we've created something called the Logan River Observatory Datasets. And this is a collection resource in HydroShare. Collection resources don't hold the content themselves. They are just pointers to other resources in HydroShare. So all of these resources are Logan River Observatory datasets that we've collected together into this collection resource. And then each one of these links out to a separate resource in HydroShare. So this happens to be the raw data for the Spring Creek storm drain site that has all of these raw data files. One other thing that I want to mention, and you hopefully know about this already, but in HydroShare, we've set up groups associated with each one of your thematic cluster projects. So here's the coastal cluster, and there's nothing shared with the coastal cluster yet, but each one of your thematic cluster projects has a group. And if you share something with that group, it's going to show up on your group page. And so all of the data products that you share with that group are going to show up here, and people who can see your group can actually see the data products that you've shared with your group. So that's another way of linking things together. Here's all of the data sets that I've shared in HydroShare that are associated with my thematic cluster. Okay. Then Kirsten, you've got a number of examples. So let me stop sharing and you can maybe talk through some of these EarthChem examples.
Yeah, I mean, it just basically a lot of overlap. Let me just go to one of the data sets here. Can you see it?
Yes.
Just confirming. This is one of the old CZO data sets registered from the Susquehanna Shale Hills CZO. And the links here that I wanted to point out are the ones to the samples. So all the samples in this data set were registered with IGSN. And so when you, oops, am I in the right data set? When you click on these IGSNs, you get to the landing pages of the actual sample that gives you information about that particular sample, whatever was provided by the owners of the sample. What I wanted to point here then further in the linking world is that this particular sample has a parent, which in this case is a terrestrial section or a soil pit actually. That was described here with all its samples that exist here. And when we go back to the original sample, it has all the siblings also listed. There are no further subsamples. So you can see individual horizons being described. What we are planning for the future really is to then also include the links back to the data into these sample landing pages. The other thing here is the link to the funding source. So you're able to actually see what the award was, what time frame it worked, and so on. Let me just go to another example here, because there are some other links that I wanted to show you. Here we have also the publication DOI, just or the whole publication, related publication that Jeff showed in HydroShare as well. This is an example where, again, we have different versions of a data set and the versions are linked together. And we have the persistent identifiers for the researcher authors of the data sets with ORCIDs where they have been provided. Another example actually is this data set, and this may be just an idea for how to manage different components of a given data set. This is a fairly big compilation that investigators at Rutgers University had done to provide an overview of data and samples in a specific research area in Central America around those volcanoes. And we here have different supplementary files. In part, those are sample and entire compilations of sample descriptions. And sometimes they are images, for example, where the images themselves have identifiers and are linked. Again, here's a new version. This one is the new version of this, and there are various other versions available for this data set. This has evolved constantly as the investigators have added new data and new samples to this data set. Another linkage that I wanted to show is here at the bottom under related information. You see a Smithsonian volcano number. The World of Volcanologists has established this catalog of volcanoes around the world, and they all have a unique identifier, which is this volcano number administered by the Smithsonian Institution. So this then links back to information about that particular volcano. This is something I thought would be something to think about for locations, for sites and so on, to give them unique identifiers that then allow you to link different data sets together that pertain to the same site. I think those were all the examples that I wanted to show, Jeff.
Thanks, Kirsten. I'll just mention that interesting linkage to the volcano. I just got off the HydroShare call, and the HydroShare team is working on adding the ability to add linkages to hydrologic features that are defined by a system called GeoConnects, which is produced by there's a team out there that I think the project is called the Internet of Water, and they produced this GeoConnect system, which is kind of a registry of hydrologic features that has like USGS hydrologic units, different geographic features like states and counties and other kind of geospatial features that you could link to your data sets that then provide geospatial context beyond just keywords that we sort of offer now. So similar concept to what Kirsten just showed that we're working on for HydroShare. Kirsten, I think maybe you should just do the last couple slides because the next one is about linking to methods, and that's something you're working on. And then you can just show that last Zenodo slide, and we'll talk about that really briefly.
Let's go back to. Yeah, this is, I mean, I'm not even going to go into presenter mode. I think it's simply enough, this slide. We have started to work, I mean, at this point in the sort of design stage, to work on something that we call a method directory. And the idea here is that, you know, instruments and specific lab procedures can be described once, and then all the data sets that are generated over time link back to that method description with different versions providing, you know, any information about, you know, specific configurations of the instrument, calibrations, and so on that were used specifically for a given data set. What we're aiming to do here is make it easier for investigators to provide detailed method information that otherwise they have to enter with each one of the data sets when they submit them to the EarthChem library. Instead, just entering that information once, making a few you know, modifications for a given data set, maybe entering, you know, reference material measurements and so on. And then linking, we envision this method description to have a unique identifier, probably when they published as a DOI as well, and then link that DOI to this data set or to each one of the data sets, which would make the whole process of providing all the relevant provenance information of analytical data way simpler for people. So it's in development. We hope to, you know, have something in, I would think towards the end of 23 that this will really take shape. We're currently working with a group that works on astromaterials and has established a catalog of lab analytical methods on defining the specific profiles of individual methods, because the metadata that we want to capture are very often method specific. So mass spectrometry has a different set of method information than electron microprobe has. So we want to provide those kind of templates or schemas for different instrumentation, for different procedures, making it easier to capture that information. So then investigators can fill out these profiles, their method profile or online, and they will have some sort of dashboard where they can manage their methods and then generate new versions, link them up with data sets and so on. So that's the idea, and I would love to hear some feedback from the group, maybe at a later point to be able to go into more detail and have people who actually work in the lab present at the call. But that's something that I wanted to cast a preview of for future functionality. So Jeff, Zenodo.
Okay, last slide. I just wanted to mention, so we of course are talking about HydroShare and EarthChem in most of the slides that we presented so far, but there are very similar concepts in Zenodo. So once you've published your Zenodo resource, it has an active digital object identifier. There's a suggested citation that shows up in the column on the right. It says cite as, and then gives you the citation. You can add references to related content, and these can be the same sorts of things: papers, theses, other data sets, whatever. In Zenodo, references are editable after publication, so you can go back and add them later as they happen. And one other thing that I will remind you, add your resources to the Critical Zone Data and Research Products community in Zenodo if you do share something in Zenodo. And that way, if somebody goes to that community, there will be a listing of everything in Zenodo that was shared from the CZNet all together in one place. And that's another way to link things together. So with that, be great to hear some feedback and have a little discussion, and we'll answer any questions that you have.
Do we want, or did we want to keep the slides on? Are there questions specifically to a given slide?
We can go back and forth if we need to, but let's see what questions there
are. There was a question from Eric. Can we see it? Oh, that was when yours. Oh, I see. I was like, what to see?
Yeah, face palm. And so, not hearing any questions, we can wrap it up. But I just want to. Is this something you all are thinking about? Is this something that you've talked about with the investigators and the PIs of your project? How's that going for you all?
I make links where I can to related data sets, any publications that come out. It's part of my plan.
And are the capabilities that you know of in like HydroShare and EarthChem, are they sufficient for what you think you need?
I'm still ironing out some details, mainly with the related data sets. It's not always clear, I think, for users, but I need to experiment more and test more. And I'm also duplicating some of my efforts by putting links up in the abstract. Kind of more resolved on it, yes.
Is that something, so the links in the abstract, is that something you plan on keeping, or you're still sort of deciding, going back and forth and deciding which one you want to do?
Yeah, I'm still on the fence about it a little bit. I want to not do that, but I'm not sure down below. It's always obvious. And that's what's keeping me on the fence.
Yeah, because people have to scroll, right? They have to scroll down to see it.
Yeah, and it's a little oblique when you're looking down, because there's several things that appear down there, right? And so sometimes it's not clear which one you want them to get to.
Yeah. How about other people?
Let's see if I can go to one of my pages real quick, but.
Tough crowd today.
I have a question more about something from your slides. You mentioned collections, a resource as collections of other data sets. I'm not super familiar with that. Is that something that we found was that in the groups, it looks like every data set you add to the group, like for our coastal cluster, and this is the reason why there aren't any in there right now, there were, but everyone in the group has access to all of them, not just, so public versus discoverable, I guess that was the difference. And so I don't know if there's a way to customize that I wasn't able to figure out just, within the group itself. So I don't know whether it is important to tag or put the data sets in the group versus maybe make a collection.
Yeah, good questions. And there's a few issues hovering around that. So a collection is a type of resource in HydroShare. So there's actually 3 types of resources in HydroShare. There's what we call a composite resource. And the only reason why we call it a composite resource is because you could put all sorts of content in there. It could be, just any file, or it could be a geospatial feature aggregation, geospatial raster, like all of those content types that we enable, they can all go in a composite resource. Then there's a collection resource, which is just a collection of other resources in HydroShare. It's pointers to all of those resources. And then there's a web app connector, which you don't have to worry about unless you're writing web apps for HydroShare. But there's these 3 types of resources. The access control for resources is the same for collection resources as it is for composite resources. So if you share that collection with an individual person, only you and that individual person can see it. If you share that collection with a group, you and the people that are in that group can have whatever access you give the group. If you give the group view access, they have view access. If you give the group edit access, they can edit the collection. You get the ideas. When a public person sees your group, they can't actually go to your group page, I think, at the moment and see the things that are shared with your group unless they're a member of the group.
Yeah, they have to
true,
ask
Claire?
to join your group before they can actually view the contents of your group. So only group members would be able to see the contents you're sharing to the group.
Right. They can see your group landing page, but they can't actually see the content of your group because they're not members of the group. Now, that in groups and communities version 2.0, which will be in a subsequent release of HydroShare, we're modifying this so that if somebody goes to your group page and they're not a member of the group, they will be able to see any public resources that are shared with the group. So if you've shared something with a group and you've made it public, anybody can see it. And that's consistent with the fact that you've made it public, right? So you have some options there, Rachel, in how you want to control access to things. If you share something specifically with a group, but it's not public, only people that are members of that group are going to be able to see it. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. I think I'll have to go in and mess around with it a little more.
It's worth
Yeah,
like kind of knowing, like recognizing the distinction that like there's only 2 statuses you can give to the other members of the group, which is view and edit. They can't actually, like other members of the group in general cannot obtain like ownership access, which would give them unlimited privilege over the resource. So you're kind of limited, or like the other members of the group are limited in how many actions they can take over the resource unless you share it directly with a user.
Okay.
But
So,
we would
just a quick
encourage you
question.
all to share anything that you want to make public or anything you're ready, share it with your group so that when somebody finds your group in HydroShare, they see all of the stuff in HydroShare that's been shared that's from your thematic cluster. So we want to encourage that. Sorry, Eric.
No, that's all good. I just want to get clarification on the use of collections. I've been using collections to break up my stuff by site. We've got, 5 different sites. Is that a best practice, or would you prefer by type?
That's fine. I mean, to me, that's like a totally valid way to use collections, as long as you specify in the abstract, like this is how I'm anticipating that people will interact with this collection, and this is how I've gone about curating it.
Yeah, well, what I've done is describe the site in that abstract for that collection.
We list that as a practice, but Jeff, maybe you have
there's a couple of other ideas there, Eric. It's totally valid, as Clara said, to do it that way, and it comes down to chunking, right? How are you chunking things?
Yeah.
And the answer to that question sometimes is, what's the most let's say intuitive way to do that. So chunking by site makes a lot of sense intuitively because here's all the stuff from this site, right? But there's also the how do I want people to see, access, and cite my data? Because somebody might cite your collection resource, or they might cite the individual things that are collected within your resource. And having both the collection and the individual resources gives them the option of which one they want to cite. So I actually think that's a good practice and is a kind of a nice thing that you've done to create that aggregation of things that people can say, I'm citing all of the data from the site, whereas a particular paper may have used this one data set from this one site, and they should really be citing that thing.
That's how we're doing it too, is we're doing it by site, Eric. And then we also have I'm calling it a root node, a main collection that lists all of our sub collections, which are all of our sites. And then within each of those sub collections, each site has all of the relevant data sets for that site, all the different resources. So, and you'll see that I'm going to show it on Monday when I present, or yeah, Monday. So.
Okay.
Cool.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I was going to attend. Yeah, so you have one massive collection that scans everything, and then it has parsed out pieces as well.
Yeah, by site, and then within each site's collection, you see each of the individual data sets.
Yeah, cool. I might borrow some of that like that.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Any other questions? And we're here and we're all together. And if you have other questions that aren't related to the presentation, feel free because we have time.
I would say, John, last time you and Eric both mentioned that something that you are looking for slash, trying to find resources on is data visualization tools. Can you kind of maybe talk a little bit about or do you mind if I ask a little bit more about what it is that you are looking for from those tools?
Sure. Basically, we have time series data, different analytes from that data, and our PIs want to be able to look at a graph of that over time and then be able to stack other analytes on top of them to compare them. So we want to be able to look at multivariable, it's a multivariable viewer over time. Basically, that's like the core of what they want. And we were
Similar
doing
here, but
viewer.
yeah,
Trying to do that.
my thinking point is the file types.
File types in what sense, Eric?
Well, most our stuff right currently is all in CSV, and so there's this kind of debate. Do we try to then do SQLite because that's the way your system wants to do things? So I'm just looking for the best approach, and I poked around on the SQLite solution. I'm not sure I'm totally pleased, but I can't give you my full layout of it yet, but.
I was talking to Austin Rainey, who's our in-house. I feel like he always has something up his sleeve in terms of an option. And so I invited him in case he had any insights on data visualization tools for you guys, because I know that he usually has some sort of suggestion on something like that.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning me, Clara. I kind of just wanted to listen to, what are your needs? What kind of, and right, you've already kind of expressed a multivariate viewer over time is what you called it. But just kind of, is that the main use case, or do you have other kind of functionality that you would like aggregating over time, or doing, correlation with other variables over time? Or, I'm just kind of throwing out different common use cases.
Yeah, I think this is Claire. I think correlation, like by plots of variables, is of interest. And then we also have synoptic data, which is looking at a variable over space at a given time. Many analytes over space at a given time. So it's kind of the opposite of a time series, it's a space series. So that's of interest as well.
Okay, and is it, yeah, it's really helpful. So, and please, interrupt if something comes to your mind and, you have a different use case that just comes to your mind. But Eric, you mentioned CSV as a format. Are there other common formats that you all use or find yourself using that you need to plot time series data or hold time series data in?
Yeah, mine are dominantly CSV, and it's just a tradition we've had for a long time. So that would be nice to not have to convert everything. But
yeah,
I think
makes sense.
Yeah, I think John might have a couple others that he's looking for.
We're publishing everything right now as CSVs, and so anything that could read that in would be great. We have played around with SQLite. I use relational databases, so I'm fine with that. But using that integrated into HydroShare would then mean that I'd have to manage another resource that was private that it then had to read. So yeah, CSV would be ideal since that's what we're natively publishing it in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're currently viewing these time series data, are you using a viewer that is kind of on your local machine and the data is on your local machine, or are you looking for a viewer that would be able to, basically, are you looking for Excel on your local computer or Google Sheets and the browser is kind of what I'm trying to get at. Where is the data living that you're looking at?
I would like something with an interface that's distributed. So something online for our users where they can, sliders where they can adjust things over time. They can, select different sites. They can select variables within the site. They can zoom in and out of time. So something that's very user friendly for them. Localized, I think, would be hard because then they'd have to install something and we'd have to provide instructions. So something distributed would be great.
Yeah, so the problem is right now when we have our monthly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, everybody's slapping up an Excel spreadsheet on their computer screen. It looks bad, looks really bad. And then they have to import all the data locally to make those graphs. I mean, it's just an extremely inefficient way of operating. And so we need something more, holistic across all of us is the issue. That's what John is referring. John and I, you can't see me because I'm on my phone, 215 is Claire. John and I work together.
Yeah, no, thanks for the input, Claire. That's really helpful. Yeah, hopefully, Claire, maybe you can point me to some of I'm assuming that the data that you all are visualizing is in HydroShare, Zenodo, or EarthChem. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, HydroShare for us.
Yeah, mine's all up on HydroShare.
Okay.
Yeah, so I stopped trying to load data on HydroShare as about a week ago because we were running into some brick walls.
Okay.
But if we're back to CSV files, I can go upload more. There are other issues we've run into in the last week.
What
Anyway,
Claire's referring to,
if you want something to play with, I can upload more. Yeah.
well, I think he's just asking what we've done with our data so far. What Claire is referring to is specifically altering data that we have to fit with the data viewer that you have built into HydroShare. That's what she's talking about hitting brick walls with. We're posting data in CSV has been fine.
Okay. No, thanks for
thanks
for elaborating on that.
And you mentioned you were having trouble with, so I saw your email and we talked a little bit about like you having trouble getting multiple variables onto the data series viewer. It looks like they need to all be in the same SQLite database for you to be able to toggle them off and on in the same data series viewer panel. So you'll have to aggregate them all into one SQLite database.
Yeah, that's probably not gonna work for us unless we do it offline and upload. So, I mean, we're trying to keep these resources, separate for pretty good reasons. So it looks like we're gonna be back to CSV files, unaltered. Also because of the need to update them.
Yeah, I think that just as related to this, but just as an aside, it would be really nice if you could swap, if you have an object that's a file within a resource, if you could swap out the actual file in that object, but keep the metadata that you've tagged to it. Especially, so I'll give you a great example. For all of our different collections and sites, I've been copying them. I've been using the copy feature, and then I have to delete all of those objects and then upload ones relevant to those sites. But most of that metadata is the same. And so since you have to do it add in key metadata line by line by line, I have to just scrap it and start over. And so when you have 5 or 6 different files for each of those, and then you have about 20 different pieces of metadata. So it'd be really nice to just say copy it over from one site. You have the same 5 files, but you just need to change out the file for that site and then just tweak something.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I were doing what you just described, I wouldn't have any hair left. So kudos to you.
I think you might be able to automate some of that process with a Jupyter notebook, but
or really any scripting language, because HydroShare has a REST API. So you could be swapping out files by removing an object and then adding the object that you need. And you can really use any language to do that.
But we have some.
And John, I want to try and understand, like, the metadata that you're talking about. Is it metadata at the file level, or is it metadata at the resource level?
It's metadata for the files. So we have 5 GIS files in one of our resources. And then we had you had suggested to make it look cleaner to add the metadata to the files. We just were uploading a README that it was then picking it up, but you had mentioned that you could add metadata per file, and we realized that it does look a lot cleaner and better that way. And so I've been going in doing them line by line. and then I copy over a resource and I have to delete all the files to upload them for another site. So it would be nice to just replace the file. If that makes sense. And yeah, I mean, I realize you could automate it with code, but the thing is too, that, you know, I might do this 10 times, and sitting there and developing code for something that's 10 times. I know there's a trade, you know what I mean? There's a trade-off between, well, do I just do it for 3 days straight and get it over with, or do I actually sit down and write code to do it for the 10 times that I have to do it? So it's kind of, I think this is a feature that a lot of people might want to see, particularly with time series data. If you're going to upload a new version of a file, not everybody is good with scripting language. So it might be something that users might want in general to replace that.
Yeah, with the time series data, if it's a SQLite database, which is the time series content type in HydroShare, HydroShare is quite capable of reading all the metadata from your SQLite file. So there's less of a problem with the time series content type as opposed to like the geospatial content types, because that metadata for the geospatial data is not actually stored in like a SQLite database or whatever. It gets stored in the back end of HydroShare.
But that's
And
but that's if it's the time series content type. I mean, somebody might just be uploading time series as a CSV, get additional data later, and want to swap out that CSV for another.
Yeah, so the only way there's going to be file-based metadata for a CSV file is if you converted it to an actual aggregation. So you've actually done that. You've right-clicked on the file and said, add metadata to file.
Right.
For every
I
single
think
one of
I've
those
done that
files.
for our CSV files. And then if you want to add to the CSV file, basically, I can't see any way to do that other than to start over for adding data to the file.
Yeah.
And that little, you know, I've right-clicked and made it into the time series content type. And then, so then inside that little icon, the time series content type, there's the CSV and then SQLite, but then you can't click on that. Can't then go replace that CSV once you've done the conversion. You can't add to it, and or if you do, you have to start over and start and do your metadata over. And we're just not. That's a non-starter. We can't do that.
Yeah, that makes
data, you know, quite frequently. Yeah,
that makes a ton of sense. So that's is that that kind of led into my next question I was going to ask you all. Like how, when you're uploading data to whatever repository that you're uploading data to, and time series data in particular, what's your like kind of standard workflows? Are you doing kind of what you just described, which I would kind of call an append kind of workflow, where right, you have a time series and then you kind of replace that time series with only appended data? So you're only kind of growing the size of that file over time?
Yeah, I would say for us, for the urban, which is, you know, Claire speaking and John together, for our time series, yes, we would append. And these are time series that are, I mean, we have sensor time series, but we also have bi-weekly data time series. And so they come off the analytical machines, you know, once every 6 months we get a QA/QC data set we would be adding to our resource. So we would be building the CSV files, whether it's you know, automated sensor data or whether it's you know, analytical data coming off, you know, ICP-MS or whatever. We'll be adding to it very much so, and that's why we like these persistent URLs, because we can keep adding to them and still cite them. Yeah,
no, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think that's most of the questions that I have. Thank you all for, you know, your input and kind of describing your workflows and the data that you're uploading. I'm gonna reach out to Clara and hopefully look at some of your data and kind of see, it's often described as like, are you using kind of a wide format versus a long format, and kind of just see your kind of data formatting patterns. And then maybe we can go from there and, you know, seeing how HydroShare can help you out to better visualize your data, or using a different tool altogether to visualize your data. So
yeah. Context here, Claire and Eric, we got to keep the context. So what we're really talking about right now is operational data management. Okay, so this is your day-to-day operational stuff. We're bringing data in from the field. We're doing quality control. We're putting data together. What HydroShare, EarthChem, Zenodo, what they do really well is archival, right? That's where we're sharing our finalized products. And there's a gray area in between there. Like, how do we get from our operational day-to-day stuff to the final data products that we actually need to share and report to NSF, right? We would like to make HydroShare as good as we can at the archival stuff, because that's what it was designed for. We would love to adapt HydroShare to try and meet some of your operational data needs where and if we can. But ultimately, the operational data management stuff, the day-to-day stuff, we as the CZ Hub team did not budget to provide operational data management for all of the thematic clusters. We're assuming that you guys are all doing the operational data management. Where we identify opportunities that we can modify the systems that we have to help you do that, we will do that. And I think it's important to bring people like Austin in, because Austin's the one who is, sort of thinking about these things on the HydroShare side of things and how we can tweak the HydroShare if we can. There's also some workflows and best practices that I think we can go through and work through to make some of this stuff work for you all that don't actually involve changing the way HydroShare or EarthChem works, but are just a matter of do step A, do step B, do step C, and eventually you get to publish data in HydroShare. It's the A, B, and C that we gotta sort out. And some of those things may work really well for you, and some of those things may be, as Claire said, this is a non-starter. We can't do this because we don't have the resources to do that. So that's
Yeah.
Also seems like you're kind of
I'm
close on a
totally
couple of them
following you,
too.
Jeff. I totally follow you. We've just, we're trying to get our data posted. That's our goal, right? And then we're just, we're running into some problems. And it's just looking like, for one that we haven't talked about yet today, it looks like HydroShare just may not work for us. And so in that case, we're going to need to know, well, what could work for us. So we're still trying to focus with you guys, just getting this stuff posted. We realize that you're not there to solve our visualization problems. We get it. Yeah.
I'd like to see just a little something that, it seems like if you can do it with some of the stuff you have, I don't know, it could be some low hanging ripe fruit. Just getting a little
I think it's a great despite our comments, I think it's a great platform. And I think that that data viewer is so super close to what we need.
That's just it. We're so close.
Right.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
if it doesn't work, doesn't work. It's okay. It's all right. We get it. Yeah. It's not a problem. Yeah.
Well, there are some of these areas where we identify them. I think we can make some changes. So that's where we need to keep this conversation going and identify those specific places where there's enough need that if we tweak things a little bit, we can get what you need. And it also meets the archival purpose. It also checks all the boxes for NSF. It does everything that we need and maybe some of the things that we really want. Okay, well, we are after 2 o'clock Mountain Time, so we're out of